You are listening to the podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors, external contributors, and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest installment of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium podcast series. I'm Bence Sabo, student of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, and our guest today has taken a really long journey to get here from the southern tip of Africa to MCC. But still, it seems like he's acting as a frequent visitor to Hungary at this point. And our guest today is Ernst Roets, and he is a political activist, writer, and filmmaker from South Africa, and he is head of policy and action of AfriForum. It also now, you have a different name for it. It's something to do with strategy. If I recall.
Yes. Yeah.
I always have to come up with new names.
Yeah.
But AfriForum is in essence a South African civil rights organization. He's also an attorney, and he holds a doctorate degree in constitutional law from the University of Pretoria. And now we're going to cover the topic of South Africa, which is a country that ever since the Nelson Mandela era has been looked upon as the country that has solved racism and all the issues related to it. But now we try to dive deeper into this topic. So Ernst, thank you very much for coming here today with us.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
And to kickstart the whole conversation, what exactly are the political happenings now taking place in South Africa? What's going on down there?
Yeah, well, as you said in your introduction, South Africa was the focus of the world's attention in the early 90s. Everyone was talking about it, and it was described as this miracle because of the apartheid system we had in the previous century and the advent of democracy, or so it was believed. And the belief was that, the problems have been solved. We are now going to be a happy place. This end of history thesis. We had all these troubles, and now we've discovered the truth. But what is happening in South Africa, I think South Africa would become more significant in the years to follow. And there are two major things happening now. The one is the unraveling of the South African state on every conceivable level, whether we're talking about service delivery, corruption, crime, education, government debt, riots. There's no measure in which South Africa is not collapsing, if you want to put it dramatically. And that is significant because that says to us that the underlying ideology that led us to believe, or the world to believe, that South Africa would succeed turned out to be false. And the other important thing that is happening now, which I believe is even more significant, is the work that communities, and especially our community, is doing to sustain itself despite these horrible circumstances. And so I represent AfriForum, as you mentioned. We are part of the broader solidarity movement, and our main focus is to secure a future for our community by building community institutions that are not necessarily linked to the government, but that are linked to the community. It's funded by the community, and it's built through community involvement. And we're seeing the power of that in action in South Africa right now.
And can you tell me examples where you can truly say that, yes, AfriForum is a success story? What are milestones or key elements within your work that you would say, this is what we're working for and these are the results that we want to see?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We've learned now in Hungary, you might say there has been historically two strains of thought on how to secure a future for the Hungarians. The one is the Kossuth Lajos approach, which is to fight for freedom. And the other one is the István Széchenyi approach, which is to build. And it was very striking to us because that's our slogan at AfriForum, is fight and build. And so obviously you have to do both. Sometimes you have to fight for justice or freedom, and sometimes you have to build. You cannot just do the one. And so on both of those areas, we've achieved some significant successes. We've won some very big court cases in South Africa. We've done the activist things. We had big protest marches and things like that, which often leads to some form of a settlement with government on issues like the maintenance of Pretoria's name, the capital city. The government wanted to change it, and we were able to prevent them from changing it. And there are many, many other examples. And then on the build side, we believe it's not necessarily as newsworthy or as spectacular, but it's the more sustainable, more important side. So it's almost like which is more important for Hungary, winning a battle or building chain bridge, you might say. And obviously both is important, but something like chain bridge is something you do and the consequences are there, the fruits are there to live on for centuries to follow, or generations to follow. And so the building part is very important to us. And we've built, as part of the Solidarity movement, higher institutions of higher learning, media institutions, cultural institutions, think tanks. It's a network. I don't know how many institutions there are. A few years ago, there were about 20, but I know of quite a few that have been founded since. So there's probably around 20 institutions in our network, which are all community-based and community-funded institutions.
Taking the institutional and generational approach, of course, we are here at MCC, and this institution is devoted to developing future leaders. And what do you say? How does AfriForum try to prepare the next generation of, I would say, socially, politically, and strategically aware youth? What is your youth building?
Yes, so there's that famous saying by Winston Churchill that if you are a student and you're not a socialist, you don't have a heart. But if you are in your adult life and you're not, and you are still a socialist, you don't have a brain.
Correct.
So it's a common thing for students to be more liberal, less conservative than older people, and we see the same in South Africa. But what happened in South Africa is people have been disillusioned by reality. Reality has disillusioned them from this idea, this ideological, end of history idea. And so our young people are fairly conservative. People are liberal in the sense that they believe other people's opinions should be respected. The good part of liberalism, there's some good aspects of it, obviously. And we are liberal in that sense that we want to tolerate differences of opinion. We really are not, despite what you might read sometimes in the media or the impression you might get on social media, we're not a racist nation. Afrikaners are not. There are very few people who are actually really racist. In South Africa as well, black people in South Africa are by and large not racist. But what we do find is young people becoming more and more involved. Our youth structure is very active. AfriForum Youth, there are many people involved in all over the country with branches and so forth. And something interesting happened, an interesting phenomenon, is if you know the students and you know the parents, you find in many cases some of our conservative student leaders who are really coming to the fore, really taking the lead. If you talk to them about their family life and the houses they grew up in, many of them would say their parents were not really involved with politics or something like that. It might just be because of the difficult political time in South Africa. But oftentimes we find parents who are apathetic politically, and then the students are student leaders. And then the parents would joke about that and say, oh, you are involved with all these activist things. But if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But yeah, I think obviously there's always a problem with the youth, but there's also, I think we can also say there's a positive side to the youth in our community, the Afrikaners.
And one last question I still would like to cover is the international cooperation. Of course, Afrikaners define themselves as conservative people. What does that mean from a South African angle? And then where do you get your inspiration from the international scene? How do you try to establish yourself in the huge conservative map of the world?
Thank you. Good question. So we are Westerners. We regard ourselves as Westerners. And even though we are descendants from people who came from the Netherlands, Germany, and France in particular, some other countries obviously as well, we don't regard ourselves as Dutch or German or French. And we don't feel like we're going home. Europe to us is not home. It's a different continent. It's a different place. Africa is our home. And so much like the Hungarians who have been shaped by the East and its influences from the East, we have been shaped by Africa. We named ourselves after the African continent. We are the Afrikaners. And so I think our conservatism could be summed up in two slogans of AfriForum that are written down in our Civil Rights Manifesto. The one is we believe in mutual recognition and respect, and the other one is peaceful coexistence. And I believe a mistake that our community has made in the last century was to try to build good relations between different communities by being paternalistic. So by deciding on behalf of other communities what would be in their interest. And we've learned from experience that doesn't work. So there's a variety of projects between, for example, the Afrikaner community, Zulu communities, the different, I can list the names, but there are many tribes in Africa with whom we are working on agricultural projects and so forth. And the secret to success is to respect each other's cultures, to respect each other's the differences, not to try to convince the other group to change, but rather to respect their way of thinking. If there's a tribe in Africa who believes in communal ownership of property, we believe in private property, but we're not going to go there and tell them you are wrong. You have to adopt our way of thinking. We respect their culture if that's their way of thinking. So that on the one hand, in terms of the bigger question of the Western world, we are Afrikaners, but we are also Westerners. We believe that we can contribute. We can learn a lot from other countries, from Hungary in particular, in terms of what's happening with Western civilization. But we also believe we can contribute because we have unique experience. We live in a hostile environment, and I think much of Western Europe in particular, and perhaps even North America, might one day find themselves in that spot. Even Central Europe, where suddenly you have a government or authorities who are actively governing against you. And we have to find a way to survive. And so I think the lessons we've learned under these circumstances, which boils down to building institutions, making yourself state-proof, as we call it, we believe we can contribute especially on that sphere.
Well, I truly hope that you will manage to prosper with this community of yours in South Africa, and I hope the world will see the problems that we need to tackle, not just on a local, but on a global scale when it comes to the nation's difficulties. Ernst, thank you very much for taking your time with me. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this MCC podcast episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors, external contributors, and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.